Hello, everyone, welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you love chilling true stories to listen to before bed, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment below about what kind of story you want to hear next. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready, because tonight's story is called The Whispering Motel in Nevada. It was early October of 2018, just after midnight, when Oliver Grant, a 32-year-old freelance photographer from London, was driving alone through the endless desert roads of Nevada. He had been in the United States for 2 weeks, chasing a personal project, capturing forgotten places across the American West. He had left Las Vegas earlier that evening, expecting to reach Reno by dawn, but after 5 hours on the road, exhaustion began to hit him like a wave. The desert stretched endlessly in both directions, and the radio had long turned into static. His eyes were heavy, his phone had no signal, and every few miles he saw only shadows of broken signs or gas stations that looked long abandoned. Around 1:30 a.m., a flickering neon light appeared ahead, a sign that read, Desert View Motel, Vacancy. The place looked old, the kind of roadside stop that might have been built in the 1960s. One gas pump stood rusted near the front, and the main office's window glowed faintly yellow. Oliver parked his rental car, the headlights cutting across the cracked asphalt and the faded number signs on each room door. There were only 6 rooms total, lined up in a single row facing the dark desert. Inside the small reception area, an elderly man sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper that looked as though it hadn't been changed in weeks. A small bell chimed as Oliver entered. Evening, Oliver said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Any rooms left? The man looked up slowly. His eyes were pale blue, his skin dry like paper. Room 3 is open, he said quietly. Cash only. $60. Oliver nodded, handed him the money, and took the small metal key with a tag that said 3. No receipt, no questions, just a faint nod from the old man as he returned to his paper. As Oliver stepped outside, the wind had picked up a dry, whistling sound that dragged the sand across the road. Room 3 was dim, but clean enough. The curtains were thin, the carpet smelled faintly of dust, and something else he couldn't quite place. Maybe old smoke, maybe something deeper. He turned on the small bedside lamp, unpacked his camera bag, and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the desert was silent, except for the occasional rustle of wind. He texted his girlfriend back in London, stopped somewhere near Tonopah. We'll drive again in the morning. Then at 2:12 a.m., it began. At first, it was faint, a low murmur, like someone speaking softly through the wall behind the bed. Oliver froze. He pressed his ear closer. The voice sounded close, maybe from the next room. A man's voice, slow and rhythmic, whispering words he couldn't quite catch. He tried to listen harder. The tone wasn't angry, it was pleading. Then a woman's voice joined, whispering back, faster, trembling, desperate. Oliver frowned. He thought maybe it was just thin walls and late-night guests arguing. But when he knocked gently on the wall, the whispering stopped instantly. Silence. He waited. 1 second. 2. 10. Then, a faint knock came back. From the other side, Oliver's chest tightened. He leaned closer again, his breath shallow. But instead of voices this time, there was a sound, a slow dragging noise, like something being pulled across the floor. Then, 3 soft knocks on the wall. 1, 2, 3. He stood up, grabbed his phone, still no signal, and tried to laugh it off. Old buildings make sounds, he muttered. It's just pipes or wind. But the sound came again, louder now. It wasn't pipes. It was definitely human. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside. The night air was cold, carrying the dry scent of sand and dust. He walked to the next door, room 4, and knocked lightly. No answer. The window curtain was drawn, but he could see faint movement inside, like a shadow shifting. "Hello," he called. "Sorry, I just heard something." The curtains stopped moving. Oliver waited a few seconds more, but there was no sound, just the desert wind and the hum of the motel sign flickering above him. He slowly walked back to his room, heart thudding. He locked the door and turned off the light, hoping to sleep. But the whispers started again. Only this time, they weren't coming from the wall. They were coming from inside his room. Oliver thought leaving Nevada would be enough to silence the echoes that haunted him, but the whisper had followed him across the ocean. It was subtle at first, barely a breath at the edge of hearing, like the faint hiss of wind through the walls of his flat in Camden Town. He would wake in the night certain that someone had called his name, only to find the room still, the air heavy with silence. Months passed, then a year, and still, some nights, he caught the same faint words slipping through the dark. Room 3. By 2021, Oliver had stopped talking about it. His friends in London chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe trauma from traveling alone in the desert. He tried to believe them. He worked less, kept to himself, and filled his nights with white noise so he wouldn't have to hear that whisper again. Then one afternoon in March, an email arrived in his inbox. It was from a stranger named Ellen Wade, a journalist from Nevada. Her message was short, polite, but enough to make his stomach twist. "Mr. Grant, I'm researching the history of Desert View Motel. You stayed there in October 2018, correct? Would you be willing to speak about your experience?" He stared at the message for a long time, his pulse rising. No one should have known that he had ever been there. He had paid in cash, left no receipt, told no one where he'd stopped that night. He replied cautiously, asking how she found him. The answer came minutes later. "Your recording device was found last month during demolition work. There was an audio file. I'd like to ask you about it." Oliver felt the air leave his lungs. They had demolished the motel. Someone had found the recorder he left behind, and apparently, someone had listened to it. They arranged a video call that weekend. Ellen appeared on his laptop screen, a woman in her 30s, dark hair tied back, a wall of old photographs behind her. She looked tired but curious, the way journalists often do. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," she said. "I know it's not easy revisiting something like this." He nodded stiffly. "You said you found my recorder." "Yes," she said. "It was buried under part of the floor in room 3. Oliver blinked. "Under the floor?" She nodded again. "They said it must have fallen through a gap when the floorboards broke. It was damaged, but the audio file was still there." Her voice softened. "I listened to it." He didn't ask what she heard. He didn't have to. Instead, she leaned closer to her webcam, her eyes dark with unease. "Mr. Grant, I need to ask, were you alone that night?" He hesitated. "Yes, completely." She was silent for a few seconds before speaking again. "Because on the recording, there's another voice. A woman's. Sometimes two. You can hear them whispering your name. But the strangest thing is, the file ends with you speaking, except it's not your accent." Oliver felt cold seep through his fingers. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "The final words on the file are 'help me.' It sounds like you, but it's not your voice. It's deeper, distorted, like you were speaking through water." He couldn't breathe for a moment. He tried to explain it away, told himself it was interference, damaged audio, digital distortion. But Ellen didn't stop there. "I went through the county archives," she continued. "The motel was built in 1961. Over the years, at least 4 people disappeared after checking in. The last one was a woman named Helen Shaw in 1972. Her car was found nearby. She was never seen again." Oliver's mouth went dry. "Helen," he whispered. That name was scratched on the closet door. Ellen's eyes widened slightly. "You saw that too?" He nodded. There was silence between them for a long time. Outside, London rain streaked the windows, tapping lightly against the glass. On Ellen's side, he could hear faint desert wind whistling through the microphone. Then she said, "There's something else." Before the demolition, workers claimed they heard voices inside room 3. At night, whispering through the walls. They stopped when the building came down, but one of the men quit the next morning. He said he still hears them at home. Oliver closed his laptop without saying goodbye. The screen went black, and for a few moments, he just sat there, listening to the muted hum of the city outside. That night, he dreamed of the desert again. He was standing outside the motel, only now it was whole, untouched, glowing under the moonlight. The sign buzzed faintly, the letters flickering in and out. He could see room 3's curtain moving, the same slow sway as before. Someone was standing behind it. He woke drenched in sweat, the taste of sand in his mouth. His clock read 3:07 a.m., the same time he'd heard the first knock years ago. Across the room, his phone buzzed. A new email notification. No subject, no sender, just 2 words in the message body. Come back. He stared at it until the screen dimmed. The next morning, he packed a small suitcase and booked a flight to Nevada. When he arrived in Reno, the sun was a hard white disk hanging above the empty horizon. Ellen met him at the airport, and together they drove 4 hours into the desert. The road stretched endlessly, a single gray ribbon cutting through pale sand and scrub. The place where the Desert View Motel had once stood was nothing more than a patch of dirt and broken concrete now. The sign was gone, the office collapsed, only fragments of brick and faded tile left scattered like bones. Ellen parked the car and got out, shielding her eyes from the wind. "This is it," she said quietly. They didn't bother rebuilding. Too many stories. Oliver stepped onto the dry ground. His shoes sank slightly into the sand. He could almost see it as it had been. The row of 6 rooms, the faint hum of the neon sign, the old man behind the counter. But now it was only silence. Ellen took a recorder from her bag. "Do you mind if I document this?" He shook his head. "Go ahead." They walked to where room 3 would have been. The wind picked up, whispering across the desert in long sighs. Ellen knelt, brushing away some sand. Beneath it, she uncovered a strip of cracked tile, the remains of the bathroom floor. "Here," she said. "This is where your recorder was found." Oliver crouched beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he heard it, so soft he thought it was imagination at first. A low murmur coming from the ground beneath them. He glanced at Ellen. She was frowning, tilting her head. "Did you hear?" Before she could finish, the sound grew louder. A whisper, then 2, then dozens, overlapping like air moving through hollow pipes. They both stumbled back. The wind had stopped completely. The desert was utterly still. The whisper rose again, clearer now, weaving words out of the air itself. It was the same voice that had haunted Oliver for years. "Help me." Ellen dropped the recorder. Oliver turned to run, but his feet refused to move. The ground beneath them vibrated softly, as if something alive was shifting below the surface. Then, faintly, the shape of a door began to appear in the dirt. Not real, just an outline, pressed into the sand, forming the size and shape of a motel room. Oliver took a step closer. He could see the number etched faintly into the air above it. 3. And from below, faint but unmistakable, came a slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3. Ellen whispered his name, but he didn't turn. He couldn't. The sound drew him closer. The desert around them faded to gray, the horizon blurring as if heat waves were swallowing the world. The knock came again, louder now, followed by a familiar voice, his own, whispering from beneath the sand. "Let me out." The desert wind roared suddenly, stinging their faces with sand. Ellen screamed his name, reaching for him, but when she blinked against the dust, he was gone. The space where he'd stood was empty, the sand smooth and untouched, the whisper already fading back into silence. She called for him until her voice cracked, her cries swallowed by the vast, indifferent desert. When the wind finally stopped, the only thing left was the small black recorder lying half-buried near her feet, its red light blinking softly. She picked it up, trembling, and pressed play. For a long moment, there was only static. Then a voice spoke. It was Oliver's, whispering, "Room 3." And then the sound of laughter, low, distant, and endless, rolled out across the desert once more. The sun was setting by the time Ellen drove away, her face pale and her hands shaking on the wheel. Behind her, the wind began again, gentle and constant, whispering across the dunes like a name carried through time. Oliver. The night grew colder as Luke lay in the narrow bed, his body stiff beneath the thin motel blanket. The hum of the air conditioner pulsed like a distant heartbeat, broken only by the faint creak of the building as the desert wind pressed against it. He stared at the cracked ceiling, tried to convince himself that what he had heard earlier, the whispers through the wall, was just the wind or his imagination. But deep down, something told him it wasn't. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Luke turned to his side and closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe steadily. Then it came again, a voice soft, hoarse, like someone speaking just inches away. It was coming from the other side of the wall, the one shared with the next room. But what chilled him most wasn't the sound of the voice. It was the fact that it was whispering his name. Luke! His eyes shot open. He sat up, every muscle tense. The voice didn't stop. It repeated his name, each time slower, quieter, but closer. Luke! Why did you come here? Luke's breath caught. He fumbled for his phone on the nightstand, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the small room. 2:14 a.m. The signal bar flickered. No service. Of course. The motel was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. He swallowed hard and pressed his ear to the wall. Silence. Then a soft knock. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. He pulled away quickly, heart hammering against his ribs. He waited, but no sound followed. After a minute, he forced himself out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for his dusty car and a flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly in the dark, Desert Sun Motel. He turned back toward the wall. The air seemed heavier now, charged with something unseen. Suddenly, a shadow passed across the thin crack under the door. He froze. Someone, or something, was standing just outside. For several seconds, the handle rattled. Luke backed away slowly until he bumped into the nightstand. He grabbed the motel's landline phone and tried dialing the front desk, but there was no dial tone, just static. Then, through the static, came another whisper. You shouldn't have taken room 7. Luke dropped the receiver, the sound echoing through the room. He stumbled backward, eyes darting toward the door. The handle stopped rattling. Silence stretched so long it pressed against his chest. Finally, he gathered enough courage to peek through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But as he turned away, the whisper came again, right behind him this time. He spun around, but there was no one there. Just the dim glow of the bedside lamp flickering slightly, as though something had passed in front of it. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like blood. He sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. Maybe he was losing it. Maybe it was exhaustion from driving all day across the desert. He'd left Los Angeles at dawn and driven for nearly 10 hours, planning to reach Reno by nightfall. But when the sandstorm hit outside Beatty, he was forced to stop at this cheap roadside motel. The clerk, a pale old man with a cloudy left eye, had given him the key to room 7 with a strange look, muttering something about not staying up too late. Luke hadn't thought much of it until now. At 3 a.m., the lights flickered again. Then the TV in the corner turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, gray, and restless. The sound of the whisper returned, but this time it was joined by others. Dozens of them. Faint, overlapping voices that seemed to crawl out of the static. Get out. Leave the door open. He's watching. Luke's skin crawled. He reached for the remote, but the TV refused to turn off. The screen distorted, showing flashes of shapes, faces, maybe, blurred and twitching in and out of view. Then, suddenly, the static cleared for a split second. A grainy black and white image appeared. It was the motel lobby. Empty, except for the clerk, standing motionless behind the counter, staring directly at the camera. Luke blinked. The screen cut back to static, and the TV finally turned off with a sharp click. His pulse pounded in his ears. He grabbed his car keys from the nightstand and decided he'd had enough. He didn't care if it was 3 a.m. He was getting out. He shoved his shoes on, grabbed his jacket, and reached for the door. But the door wouldn't open. He twisted the handle hard, but it felt jammed, like someone was holding it from the other side. Panic rose in his throat. He slammed his shoulder against the wood, once, twice. It didn't budge. Then he heard again, from behind the wall. The same whispering, this time louder. Only now it wasn't calling his name. It was laughing. Luke backed away slowly, his breath ragged. The laughter rose and fell, echoing through the paper-thin walls until it blended into something else. A sound like dragging, something heavy scraping along the floor. He stared at the base of the wall, and his stomach dropped. From the crack near the floorboard, a thin stream of dark liquid began to seep through. It spread across the old carpet in a slow, winding trail, the smell unmistakable. Blood. Luke stumbled backward, tripping over the chair. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. He grabbed the chair and threw it at the window. The glass shattered outward, letting in a gust of cold desert air. Without thinking, he climbed through the jagged frame, landing hard on the gravel outside. His hands were bleeding, but he didn't care. He ran across the empty parking lot toward his car. As he reached the driver's side, he froze again. The old motel clerk was standing under the neon sign, motionless, his pale face turned toward Luke. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said softly. "Room 7 doesn't let people leave." Before Luke could respond, the lights across the motel flickered and went out completely, plunging everything into darkness. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking, finally getting the car door open. He jumped inside and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then died. He tried again. Nothing. The headlights flickered briefly, revealing something in the rearview mirror. A shape, sitting in the back seat. Luke's breath hitched. Slowly, he turned his head. The back seat was empty. But the whisper came again, this time from inside the car. "Drive." He screamed and slammed the door open, stumbling out into the desert road. He didn't stop running until the motel was just a dim shape in the distance, its neon sign blinking one last time before going dark completely. The desert stretched endlessly around him, silent except for the wind. The highway was empty. No cars, no sound, just the endless hum of the night. And then, faintly, from somewhere behind him, he heard it again. A woman's voice this time. "Luke, you forgot your room key." He turned, his heart racing, but there was nothing there. Only the barren desert, the faint outline of the motel barely visible under the starlight. Yet as he stared into the distance, he could swear one of the windows of room 7 was glowing faintly red, like an eye, watching him. He took a step backward, unsure if he was awake or dreaming, his mind blurring between fear and exhaustion. The air grew heavy again, pressing against his chest, and somewhere deep in the wind, the whispers returned, weaving through the night like threads of curse. "Don't leave us, Luke." He turned toward the road and began walking, each step slow and unsteady. The night stretched on endlessly, the horizon swallowed in black. Behind him, the Desert Sun Motel waited, silent, patient and alive. And though Luke didn't see it, Room 7's door slowly creaked open. Something stepped out and began to follow. Luke's legs ached as he trudged down the empty Nevada highway. The cold desert wind lashed at his face, and the silence pressed on his ears until it almost hurt. He'd been walking for what felt like hours, but the road looked exactly the same, endless, black, stretching into nowhere. The pale ribbon of the Milky Way shimmered faintly above him, and the occasional gust of sand brushed against his ankles like invisible fingers. Every few minutes, he turned around. The motel was still there in the distance, glowing faintly under the half moon. But something about it didn't seem right anymore. It looked wrong. The shape seemed to shift whenever he blinked. At one moment, it was the squat, single-story building he remembered. Then it looked taller, stretched out, with more windows that flickered faintly as though people were moving behind him. He shook his head and kept walking, muttering under his breath. "It's the exhaustion, Luke. You're seeing things. Just keep going." But as he walked, the whispers returned. They didn't come from behind him this time. They came from the desert itself. Faint, layered voices carried by the wind, weaving between the sagebrush and the rocks. "Come back. You left too soon. Room 7 isn't done with you." Luke pressed his palms against his ears, but the voices were inside his head now. He stumbled forward, his breath ragged. Somewhere far off, the faint yellow glow of headlights flickered. Relief surged through him. A car. Finally. He waved his arms, shouting as loud as he could. The headlights grew brighter, the sound of an engine rising. But as it neared, Luke noticed something strange. The car looked old, impossibly old. A 1950s Cadillac, black and gleaming, its chrome edges catching the moonlight. It slowed to a stop beside him, gravel crunching under the tires. The window rolled down halfway, revealing a woman behind the wheel. Her hair was dark and perfectly styled, her lips a deep shade of red. She wore a white blouse and pearl earrings, the kind of fashion Luke had only seen in old photographs. Her eyes, however, looked empty, glassy, as if they were staring through him. "You look lost," she said, her voice calm and melodic. Luke hesitated. "Yeah, my car broke down at the Desert Sun Motel. I just need to get to the next town." The woman tilted her head slightly. "The Desert Sun Motel? That place hasn't been open in years." He frowned. "What do you mean? I was just there a few hours ago." Her expression didn't change. She reached across the passenger seat and opened the door. "Get in, sweetheart. You shouldn't be out here alone." Every instinct in Luke's body screamed not to move. But the cold was unbearable, and the thought of walking another hour alone made his skin crawl. He got in. The interior smelled faintly of old leather and lilacs. The car purred softly as it rolled forward down the highway. Luke glanced at her. "So, what do you mean it hasn't been open in years?" She smiled faintly. "There was an accident there. A long time ago. A fire, they say. Burned the place down. 7 people died. One of them was a man who checked in during a storm, just passing through. No one ever found his body." Luke felt his chest tighten. "What year was that?" 1958. He turned toward the window, his breath fogging the glass. The desert rolled by in eerie stillness. The headlights cut a pale path through the night, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Luke noticed something strange. The reflection in the window didn't match what he saw inside the car. In the reflection, the woman's face was different, burned, hollow, her skin cracked like old wax. Her eyes were completely black. He jerked his head around to look at her directly, but she looked perfectly normal again. Smiling, serene, her hands steady on the wheel. Luke swallowed hard. "I think I'll get out here," he said quickly. She didn't respond. He reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't move. He tried again. Nothing. The lock was jammed. The car began to speed up. "Hey, stop the car!" he shouted, panic rising in his throat. The woman's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her lips curved into a slow, unnatural smile. "You checked in," she whispered. "You can't check out." Luke slammed his shoulder against the door again and again until finally it burst open. The rush of cold air hit him as he threw himself out of the moving car. He rolled violently across the gravel shoulder, scraping his arms and face before coming to a stop. When he looked up, the car was gone, completely vanished. No taillights, no dust, nothing. Only silence and the distant hum of wind. He lay there for a while, dazed, staring at the stars above him. His body ached all over. The desert stretched around him like a vast, endless sea of black. And then, far behind him, he saw it again. The faint red glow of the motel's neon sign. He hadn't moved. He was back where he started. Luke sat up slowly, disbelief washing over him. The sign flickered weakly in the distance. Desert Sun Motel. His heart sank. He turned around. The road behind him was gone. There was nothing but flat sand stretching into the horizon. The desert had swallowed the highway. He stumbled to his feet and began walking toward the motel. It was the only thing that existed now. The only landmark in this strange, dead landscape. As he drew closer, he saw movement near the front office. The old clerk was standing by the door, motionless, holding something in his hand, a small brass key. "Room 7's waiting," the man said softly. Luke shook his head. "No, I'm not going back." The clerk tilted his head. "You never left." The ground beneath Luke's feet seemed to shift slightly, the sand rippling like water. The air grew thick, humming faintly. He blinked, and for a moment, the world twisted. The motel, the desert, even the stars above seemed to spin. When he looked again, he was standing back inside room 7. The same cracked ceiling, the same flickering lamp, the same faint smell of blood in the carpet. He fell to his knees, gripping the edge of the bed. No, this isn't real." The whispers returned, louder than before. They swirled around him, dozens of voices speaking at once, crying, laughing, murmuring his name. "Stay with us. You belong here. We never leave." The TV flickered on again, showing the same static. But this time, among the gray lines, Luke saw something. Faces pressed against the inside of the screen, screaming silently. He recognized the woman from the car, the old clerk, a few others, strangers whose eyes were hollow and black. And then he saw himself. On the screen, Luke was sitting on the bed, staring blankly ahead. He turned his head toward the TV and saw that the reflection matched perfectly. Every movement, every breath. His pulse thundered. He reached for the plug and yanked it out of the wall. The screen stayed on. He stumbled backward, slamming into the dresser. The lamp flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. Only the faint, gray glow of the television remained, pulsing like a heartbeat. From the corner of the room came a sound, soft footsteps. Someone was in there with him. "Who's there?" Luke shouted, his voice cracking. No response. Then, just as his eyes began to adjust to the dark, he saw it. A figure standing near the bathroom door. Tall, motionless, its face hidden in shadow. He froze. The figure moved closer, its feet silent on the carpet. The air grew colder with every step until Luke could see his own breath. He backed up until he hit the wall. The whispers filled the room, overlapping, impossible to understand, yet all circling around one word. "Stay." The figure stopped inches away from him. Slowly, it leaned forward, and in the dim light, Luke saw its face, or what was left of it. Charred skin, hollow eyes, and a wide, cracked mouth that stretched far too wide. Luke screamed and swung his arm wildly, grabbing the nearest object, the lamp, and smashing it across the creature's face. The light shattered, sparks flying, and the thing vanished in a burst of smoke. The whispers stopped. Silence returned. Luke collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. For a long while, he didn't move. He stared at the doorway, half expecting the figure to return, but the room stayed still. Then, from behind him, came a faint creak. The door to room 7 was opening, slowly, steadily. Beyond it, instead of the hallway, there was something else. A long corridor, lined with identical doors stretching into darkness. Each one marked with a brass number, 7. Luke stared into the impossible sight before him. The air inside the corridor shimmered faintly, like heat rising from sand. He could hear them again. The whispers, the laughter, the crying, all calling him deeper inside. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, and as the door shut softly behind him, the Desert Sun Motel stood silent in the desert night, waiting for the next traveler who would dare to check into room 7. But for Luke, the corridor stretched on forever, and the whispers never stopped. Luke's feet dragged along the carpeted floor as he stumbled deeper into the endless corridor. His breath echoed softly against the narrow walls, and each door he passed looked exactly the same. Faded paint, tarnished brass number, and the faint smell of mold and old smoke. Every few steps, he reached for a handle, desperate to find one that opened. But they were all locked. Every single one. The buzzing sound grew stronger the further he walked, a low electrical hum that seemed to seep out from the walls. He glanced behind him once, hoping to see the door he'd come through, but it was gone. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions now, its vanishing point fading into a faint orange glow that pulsed like a dying ember. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The only reply was his echo, distorted, delayed, as if someone else were mimicking him seconds later. "Is anyone there?" He froze. That last echo didn't match his tone. It came lower, softer, with a voice that wasn't quite human. Luke's hands trembled as he touched the nearest doorknob again. It felt warm, as if someone had just been on the other side. He pushed harder. It didn't move, but from within he heard a faint sound, something dragging slowly across the floor, followed by a quiet thump. Then came the breathing. Not his. Something was breathing just inches away behind that door, slow, labored, wet. Luke staggered backward, tripping over his own feet, his back hitting the opposite wall. The air seemed heavier now, thicker, like it carried the weight of hundreds of voices all whispering at once beneath the hum. He ran. He didn't care where the hallway led anymore. He just ran, the sound of his shoes muffled by the threadbare carpet, the doors blurring into one long streak of darkness. Every few seconds, he could hear the faint creak of hinges behind him, as if some of those locked doors were beginning to open. He dared not look back. The orange glow ahead of him grew brighter, flickering like a candle in the wind. His heart hammered his chest. When he finally reached it, he realized it wasn't a light. It was fire. At the end of the corridor stood a door slightly ajar, and through the cracks spilled the glow of burning flames. The smell of smoke hit him instantly, thick, acrid, and old, as if the fire had been burning for years without consuming anything. He hesitated. His hand hovered over the knob. Then he pushed the door open. The heat was immediate, almost suffocating. Inside was a large room, or what used to be one. The walls were blackened, the ceiling half collapsed. Flames licked the corners, yet nothing seemed to burn completely. In the center of the room stood a bed, charred and half melted, and on it sat a figure. It was the woman from the car. Her back was to him, her hair singed, the ends glowing faintly like dying embers. Her white blouse was covered in soot. The fabric melted into her skin. She didn't move at first, only stared at the cracked wall ahead. "Why are you here?" Luke asked, his voice shaking. She turned slowly. Her face was half-burned, but her eyes were clear, bright, sorrowful, and endless. "You saw what you weren't supposed to," she said softly. "You walked between what's gone and what won't die." Luke shook his head, backing away. "I just want to leave." Please, tell me how to get out of here." The woman tilted her head, her skin cracking faintly at the movement. "Out? There is no out. You took the key. You stepped inside. You became part of it." She raised one hand, and in her palm gleamed something small and brass. A motel key, number 7 engraved deeply into the metal. "You were supposed to hand it back," she whispered, "but you kept it, and now it keeps you." Luke glanced down at his pocket instinctively, and his stomach dropped. There, inside his jeans, he felt the outline of the same key, the one he'd taken when the clerk first gave it to him. He reached for it, yanking it out. It felt cold now, freezing even in the heat of the fire. The number shimmered faintly, as if alive. "What happens if I drop it?" he asked. The woman's eyes flickered, flames reflecting in their glassy surface. "Then room 7 chooses someone else. But it never lets you go." The fire surged suddenly, roaring up the walls. The woman's face twisted, not in anger, but in pain. Her voice grew faint, distant, as if fading back into smoke. "Don't run. It only follows faster." Luke turned and fled before she could finish. The moment he crossed back into the corridor, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. He sprinted through the endless hallway, his lungs burning, the whispers swelling again. But this time they weren't pleading. They were laughing, mocking. He reached another door, this one slightly different. The brass number was crooked, almost melted. He didn't think. He just burst through it. Darkness swallowed him whole. He stumbled, caught himself, and looked around. The air here was cold and still. He was in another motel room, the same size, same layout, but everything looked untouched. The bed was neatly made. The curtain swayed gently even though there was no wind. The clock on the nightstand read 2:13 a.m., exactly the same time as before. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, it can't be." He turned toward the mirror above the dresser. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't him. The man in the mirror looked older, his eyes sunken, his face pale. His lips moved a moment before Luke's did, like a delay in a recording. "Get out," the reflection mouthed. Luke stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. The mirror rippled slightly, and for a brief second, he saw something behind the reflection. Dozens of faces pressed against the glass, their mouths wide open in silent screams. He looked down at the key still in his hand. The number had changed. It no longer said 7. It now read 8. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Luke froze. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. He inched toward the door, his heart hammering in his ears. Who is it? No answer. Then, from the other side, a low voice. Room service. He recognized that voice. The old clerk. Luke's hand hovered over the knob, trembling. He knew he shouldn't open it. He knew something waited on the other side. But curiosity, or maybe hopelessness, pushed him to do it anyway. He turned the handle. The hallway outside wasn't a hallway anymore. It was a vast, dark space filled with shifting shadows and faint whispers. The floor seemed to breathe beneath his feet, rising and falling like the chest of something enormous. The clerk stood a few feet away, holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee. His smile was gentle, almost kind. "I told you," he said quietly, "room 7 doesn't let people leave. But you've gone further now. You've crossed into its heart." Luke stepped back, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted a place to sleep." The clerk's eyes softened. "That's how it always begins." He set the tray down, and the cups began to rattle slightly on their own. Steam rose from them, dark, almost black. The smell wasn't coffee. It was burnt wood and decay. "Drink," the clerk said. "It helps with the noise." Luke refused. The clerk sighed, his form flickering faintly like static. "Then you'll keep hearing them." The whispers rose again, deafening now. The voices screamed and pleaded all at once, forming words he could almost understand. "We burn or we wait, we remember. Luke fell to his knees, covering his ears. The sound pressed inside his skull like knives. The lights flickered violently. When he looked up again, the clerk was gone, and the door had vanished. He was alone once more. The floor beneath him began to crack, revealing a red glow from below, like molten lava seeping through. The carpet curled and smoked. Luke ran toward the far wall, pounding against it. It crumbled like ash at his touch. Beyond the wall was darkness, not empty, but alive. He saw shapes moving within it, countless silhouettes twisting and writhing in silence. Faces formed and disappeared. Hands reached out, grasping for him. "Let me go!" He screamed, tears mixing with sweat on his face. The whispers stopped, and a single voice answered, "You're already gone." The floor gave way beneath him, and he fell, endlessly, weightlessly, through fire, through whispers, through the echo of laughter that wasn't human. When he finally opened his eyes, he was standing once again in the parking lot of the Desert Sun Motel. The dawn was breaking over the desert. Birds chirped faintly. Everything looked calm, normal, untouched. His car sat where he had left it. The neon sign buzzed softly. He almost cried with relief. He climbed into the car and started the engine. It worked on the first try. The air smelled clean. He glanced at the rearview mirror. His reflection was pale, but normal. He drove away, fast, the motel shrinking in the distance. But after 10 minutes, something strange happened. The radio, though turned off, began to hum softly. Then it whispered his name. "Luke." He turned it off completely. The whisper continued. He looked down at the passenger seat. Lying there, glinting in the sunlight, was a brass key. Number 7. His stomach turned to ice. He pressed his foot harder on the gas. But no matter how fast he drove, the desert never changed. The same highway, the same rocks, the same stretch of endless road. And far behind him, in the shimmering heat of the rising sun, the Desert Sun Motel stood once again, as if it had never left, waiting, watching, and whispering his name. The following morning, the desert was strangely still. The sky washed in a pale orange glow as the first light of dawn brushed across the sand. Matthew stood in front of the whispering motel, staring at the cracked sign swaying faintly in the wind. The vacancy light, which had flickered red the night before, was dead now. No hum, no sound, just silence. Even the desert seemed to be holding its breath. He could barely believe he had made it through the night. His hands still trembled as he held his car keys, but the relief of stepping outside into the cold, open air felt unreal, like waking up from a nightmare that still clung to him. The motel stood behind him, its windows dark and lifeless, though he could have sworn he'd seen figures moving behind the curtains only a few hours earlier. The old man from the front desk, if he had ever been real, was gone. The chair behind the counter was empty, the ledger covered in a fine layer of dust, as though it hadn't been touched in years. The keys still hung on their hooks, every one of them covered with cobwebs. Matthew stepped back, unsure if what he'd seen the night before had truly happened. The voices whispering through the walls, the woman's humming in room 7, the shadow that had reached toward him through the mirror. It all felt too vivid to be a dream. He turned toward his car and noticed something that made his stomach twist. The sand around his tires was undisturbed, even though he had driven there the night before. His footprints, too, were gone. The wind hadn't erased them. The ground was still. It was as if he had never arrived. Matthew climbed into his car, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He started the engine, and the silence shattered with the low growl of the motor. He didn't look back. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, the road shimmering in the distance. He drove until the motel was nothing but a speck behind him, until the sign was lost to the horizon. But no matter how far he drove, the whispering followed. It began faintly at first, just beneath the hum of the tires, a soft, familiar sound, like voices pressed against the walls of his skull. Then clearer, a woman's voice, almost gentle, almost kind, whispering his name. Matthew. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. No, he muttered to himself. I'm not hearing this. It's over. Yet the voice came again, closer this time. Room 7, it said. You never left. He slammed the brakes, his car skidding to a halt in the middle of the empty road. The desert wind blew through his open window, warm and dry, carrying a faint smell of rust and dust. He turned on the radio to drown out the voice, but all he heard was static. Beneath it, barely audible, was the same soft whispering. In panic, he switched stations. Every single one played the same thing, static and the faint hum of that woman's tune from Room 7. His breath hitched. He switched the radio off and sped down the highway, the sound of gravel and wind filling his ears. Hours passed before he saw another sign of civilization, a small diner off the side of the road called Sandy's Stop. He pulled in quickly, desperate for human presence. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and a woman in her 50s looked up from behind the counter. Morning, she said with a warm smile. You look like you've seen a ghost. Matthew almost laughed, but the sound came out hollow. I stayed at a motel a few miles back, he said. The Whispering Motel. You know it. The woman froze, her smile fading. She glanced toward an older man sitting at the counter, who slowly lowered his coffee cup. The room grew quiet. Son, the man finally said, that place burned down 20 years ago. Ain't nothing out there now but ruins. Matthew stared at him, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. I was there last night. The lights were on. I talked to someone, an old man. There were rooms, furniture, everything. The woman exchanged another look with the old man. You sure you're talking about the place by Highway 95? She asked softly. Yes, that one, Matthew said, his voice trembling. Room 7. The man's eyes widened. He set down his cup and leaned closer. You saw Room 7? He said, almost whispering. That's where the fire started. Some woman, no one really knows what happened. They said she never left. The air in the diner felt heavy now. Matthew's skin prickled with cold. He could still hear faint echoes of that same humming in the back of his mind. He left the diner not long after, his coffee untouched. The road ahead seemed longer than before, the horizon endless. The further he drove, the quieter it got, until there was nothing left but the sound of the wind and the steady beat of his own heart. That night, Matthew stopped at another motel on the outskirts of a small Nevada town. This one was newer, clean, brightly lit. He checked in, took a shower, and tried to convince himself that what he'd seen before was nothing more than exhaustion, heat, and imagination. As he lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, he reached over to turn off the bedside lamp. The room fell into darkness. Silence settled in. Then, faintly, through the thin motel walls, he heard it again. The same voice. The same humming. Room 7. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The lamp flickered on by itself, casting trembling shadows across the walls. The air felt colder now, though the heater was running. And from a mirror above the small desk, something shimmered, something that looked like a silhouette standing just behind him, blurred and still. Matthew didn't move. His breath came shallow and slow. The whispering grew louder, circling him like the wind, until the words became clear. You never checked out, Matthew. His reflection smiled, but he wasn't smiling. The light flickered again, and the half-second of darkness that followed, the room changed. The clean white walls turned yellowed, the carpet scorched. Smoke filled the air. The sound of fire crackled faintly, followed by screams, echoes from a night long past. Matthew turned toward the door, but it wouldn't open. He pounded on it, his voice hoarse, the doorknob burning hot beneath his palm. Behind him, the reflection in the mirror kept smiling, even as flames began to lick at its edges. Outside, to any passing traveler, the motel would look perfectly normal. just another quiet place to rest along the desert road. But if someone listened closely, late at night, they might hear it too. The faint sound of whispering through the walls, the humming of a woman's song, and sometimes a man's desperate voice calling out from behind the glass, still trying to escape a room that no longer exists. Some say if you drive through that stretch of Nevada desert at night, you'll see the old whispering motel sign glowing faintly in the dark. And if you stop, if you listen, you might hear a voice ask softly, "Would you like a room for the night?" But no one ever stays twice.